Welcome back to Pursuing Justice. I'm Harriet Hendel. Today, we have a guest who's devoted his life to helping those who've been wrongfully convicted of a crime for which they were innocent. Jim McCloskey founded the very first Innocence Project in the United States, and he named it Centurion Ministries. It's in Princeton, New Jersey, and it began in 1983. He's also the author of a new book called When Truth is All You Have. Welcome to the program, Jim.
Well, thank you, Harry. It's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to speaking with you on in this medium. So we have a lot to talk about.
Yes, yeah. It is wonderful to have you as my guest today. And indeed, we have so much to share with our listeners. Take us back to the early 1980s. Was there any awareness on your part that there were people behind bars who were actually innocent? What was your own feeling about that issue back then?
Well, when I met the first man that I eventually started working for, in whose innocence I had come to believe, I was 37 years old. I was a former businessman and Navy officer, and I had no experience whatsoever in any way, shape, or form with the criminal justice system. I'd never been to a courthouse. It was my view at that time, like most people, that I thought America's criminal justice system was practically flawless in that if you were convicted of a crime, surely you did it. And not only that, but the police and the prosecutors would never bring anybody to the bar of justice who they didn't have solid, credible evidence was guilty of that crime. So I was never on a jury. If I were, I probably would have had to recuse myself because I would have had a strong presumption of guilt going into it.
Very interesting. Now, you didn't set out to create an organization which was devoted to helping those who were wrongfully incarcerated. What were you doing before you founded Centurion Ministries?
Well, when I graduated from Bucknell University at the age of 22, majored in economics, went on to become an OCS-trained Navy officer. I spent the next 3 years in the Navy, half of which was in Japan, and the other half in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam, as an advisor to the South Vietnamese Navy, patrolling the rivers of the Mekong Delta. And then for the next 12 years, I worked for two management consulting firms. One was in Tokyo, and I would work with Western firms wanting to enter the Japanese market and do market research and consult with them as to how to do it. And then the last half of my 12-year business career, I came home to Philadelphia, where I was born and raised, and worked for another consulting firm called Hay Associates. And my responsibility was to build its consulting business with Japanese subsidiaries operating in the United States and establish our office in Tokyo. So that's how I spent my first 37 years, so to speak.
But then how did you take such a different path?
Well, what happened was in the 1970s, when I'm in my 30s, I had led a rather, I don't know if you want to call it reckless, but I wasn't happy with my personal conduct. I was, to say the least, among other things, promiscuous and not very careful about my behavior. As I look back on it, and as I was reflecting on it at that time, it was I'd lost my moral compass in terms of not business dealings, but just personal conduct. At the same time that was going on, I was starting, my business career was going fine. I was making good money, had a nice house on the main line of Philadelphia, and was traveling the world, doing the work that I thought I loved. But at the same time, percolating within me were two competing forces. One was I started to lose my passion for the business world. Material things meant nothing to me. I thought I didn't feel as if I was having I felt as if my life was shallow, self-serving, selfish. I wasn't doing anything for anybody else other than myself and the corporate and my employer. So that was percolating within me, a certain I felt a certain alienation to the world about me. Like, this is not real. This was not what life is really about. This is not the truth of living. And at the same time, I returned to church after a long hiatus for the first time in my adult years. And I belonged to a Presbyterian church. And the minister there was very influential with me in terms of his message of the gospel, which was to serve others, to wash others' feet. And I started to take the gospels and the scriptures and my church life very seriously, to the point where I started to think about, wait a minute, is God calling me to leave the business world and become an ordained church pastor? Because that's what my pastor was doing. I saw that he was touching the hearts and souls of people, and I thought that was a purposeful, authentic life. And so I felt the call to leave the business world and go into the ministry, and therefore go to Princeton Theological Seminary, get a Master of Divinity degree, and that's a 3-year program. And once I got that, once I accomplished that, to go on and become an ordained church pastor. So that's what those forces were at work within me. And I also felt, I'm actually living this hypocritical life. I'm having this spiritual development, but at the same time I'm carousing around. So it's time to take the foot out of the secular world and go into the spiritual world, and announce who I am. Who am I? What is my identity? And that really compelled me to feel a call to go into ministry, which I did in 1979 by going to the Princeton Seminary.
So that pastor that you knew was, would you say he was a catalyst for the change that occurred in your life?
Without a question. No question. His name is Dick Streeter. He's still with us. He's retired, but I still stay in good contact with him. And were it not for Dick Streeter and his ministry and his preaching and his counseling of me, when I was struggling with this decision, and it was a struggle, I told no one. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell my friends. I told nobody except counseling with Dick about, Dick, I'm feeling this call to give up the world and go into the ministry. And he just gently counseled me, told me to go into the scriptures. I'll find the voice of God within those scriptures. And that's exactly what That's exactly what happened. Because when I was,
sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, so I would, the scriptures, Old and New Testament, were my meat and drink. And there were several things that really drove me to this decision. I'm reading the words of Christ in the Gospels, and he said, he who saves his life will lose it, and one who loses his life for my sake will find it. And then I went to the Gospel of John randomly one night, the last chapter, and the resurrected Christ is speaking to Peter, and he tells Peter, when you were young, you walked where you would. When you become older, another will gird you and take you where perhaps you don't want to go. Well, that was me. When I was young, I walked wherever I wanted to go. I did whatever I wanted to do. And so now it was time to give up that life and go follow Christ and go into the ministry.
Mm-hmm. So the ministry, though, didn't take you down a traditional path. What's the connection between what you chose to do, and prison.
Well, here's what happened. So I'm at the seminary getting this Master of Divinity degree with the intention and the objective of becoming ordained. And you do your field education work. I could do it at a church, a hospital, and I volunteered to go to be a student chaplain at Trenton State Prison. There was an agreement between the seminary administration and the prison administration that every year they would accept student chaplains who would be assigned several cell blocks and just go cell to cell 2 afternoons a week and just meet and talk with the inmates about whatever they wanted to talk about. It was not evangelical or anything like that, just to be their friends, to be somebody from the outside that they could have some kind of contact with. So I volunteered for that program in September of 1980. And I was assigned 2 cell blocks in the maximum security unit for the school year. And it was during that work as a student chaplain in the fall of 1980 that I was responsible for visiting with 40 different men and 40 each confined to their own cell, pretty much 24/7 because they were in the maximum security unit. One of those 40 men, one of them, was constantly proclaiming his innocence. And that man's name was Jorge de los Santos, nicknamed Chiefy. He was in his 7th year for a Newark homicide. All he talked about was the fact that, Mr. McCloskey, I didn't do this crime. I'm an innocent man in prison. I'm doing life in prison for somebody else's murder. And I had a very difficult time believing him. Because at that time, as I mentioned a little earlier in our conversation, as far as I was concerned, if you were convicted in a court of law, you were guilty. There was no question about that. And so I had, this was my encounter with him. And over time, I'm talking about September, October, November, he's constantly talking about how he didn't do it, how the police and the prosecutors, not only that he didn't do it, but that he was framed for it. So that was my initial encounter with an innocent man. And if you want me to go on about that, I will. But
yes, I would very much like the story of Chiefy. Of course, I've read your wonderful book, and you talk great deal about him. So tell us more about how you seem to gravitate towards Chiefy. Did that mean that you spent less time with the other men, or you still spoke to them?
That's a very good question, Harriet, because I had to be careful. I'm on that here for 3 or 4 hours every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, and I got along with most of the inmates, and they wanted to talk to me. They enjoyed talking to me. I enjoyed talking to them. So I had to be careful about how much time I could spend with Chiefy about his case. But I also I broke the rules. The rules were, don't ever get involved, don't ever discuss or in any way connect yourself with the inmate's personal or legal casework, legal life. But he got my attention. First of all, he and I got along really famously. He was very gregarious, had a great personality. He was easy to be with, had a good sense of humor. I always looked forward to getting up to his cell. But like I said, I had to be careful of the other guys. But I did something I should not have done. It was completely against the rules. And that is, I gave him permission to call me at home. They could, if any of the inmates want to make a call, they could ask the guard to bring him a telephone if it wasn't being used.